The stagecoach limped into Sagebrush Flats on a Saturday evening, axles whining like tired dogs. Dust hung low over the street, soft as cotton until you breathed it in, and it turned to grit on your tongue. The boardwalk outside the Lantern House. Boarding hotel groaned under boots, spurs, and the sort of secrets people carry when they've learned too young how to keep quiet. Garrett. Lane ran the Lantern House with steady hands and quiet eyes. He stood behind the counter, a ledger open, pencil tucked behind his ear. He liked the sound the bell made when someone pushed the brass button bright, hopeful. He liked ending his days with the scent of strong coffee and clean sheets, with the knowledge that a bed and a hot meal can keep a person alive just as surely as a gun. The coach door swung open. 3 girls climbed down. The youngest hit the dirt running and spun once like she wanted to catch the whole town in her arms. The middle one moved with that stubborn grace of someone who has tripwires under her feet and refuses to fall. The oldest stepped down last and looked over the street with a careful, measuring gaze. Garrett felt his heart stumble. He knew that stride and the tilt of that chin. He knew the dark hair braided back in a way that said, "There's work yet." Knew the voice even before she reached the counter and said, without looking up at him, "We need 1 room. 1 night. Maybe 2, if the wind is kind." Nora, Garrett whispered, and he hated himself for the way her name came out, hidden. Unguarded, she looked up. Her eyes widened a fraction. Shock touched her face. It passed like a small cloud there and gone. The youngest freckled. 10, if an honest look would guess, was already peering through the glass case at the sweet buns, as if they were Miracle and Map. The middle sister, 16, a sliver of scowl and softness at war, had crossed her arms, like a shield. "Afternoon," Nora Vale said. She had a half-smile she used when she would not let her hands shake. "We don't snore, mister. But we do make noise," she went on, leaning a hip against the counter, eyes bright as if daring. "The room to keep up." "You've got room for that?" "We have room," Garrett said, his voice steady now only because he made it so. "Always room." The little one pressed her palms flat on the counter. "Do the buns cost more if I stare at them a long time?" she asked, solemn. "They cost less," Garrett said. "Staring is like sweeping for my heart," she beamed. The middle one, June. If memory hadn't lie-rolled her eyes and fought a smile like she'd get punished for joy, Nora took a deep breath, the kind that bottoms out a person for a second. "We'll be quiet," she said. He shook his head. "No need," he said. "This house knows what noise is for. Sometimes noise keeps folks alive." "We're not staying long," June muttered. "We're staying as long as we're safe," Nora said, not unkindly, and turned back to Garrett. "We'll take any room with a door that locks." Garrett slid the ledger toward her and pushed a pen he kept for people who still liked the feel of ink in their fingers. He asked, a trembling part of himself, almost hoping she would lie because it might mean he could pretend. She did not. "Nora Vale," she said, writing it. "June Vale, Penny Vale." Penny reached up and, puffing out her cheeks with grand effort, wrote her name herself. June took the pen and bled it a moment. Garrett saw on the paper where her hand had pressed harder than she meant. Then June handed the pen back. "Do you have luggage?" Garrett asked stupidly, because he had eyes and could see the frayed carpet bag and the violin case and not much else. "We unpack trouble," June said under her breath. Nora's gaze flicked to Garrett's face and held there, like fingers on. "A pulse. Just the one bag," she said. "And that noise I promised." Penny had already pressed her nose to the glass again and fogged it with her breath. "Mister," she asked. "What's your name?" "Garrett Lane," he said. Nora didn't step back. She didn't step forward. She lifted her chin half an inch. "Garrett," she said, trying to sound like people try a rung of a ladder before. They put their weight on it. He felt the echo of his old name inside that sound, the one he didn't use anymore, the one that had been burned and buried. He put his hand softly on the bell and pressed it. The bright ring cut the air. It felt like a beginning and a warning at once. Sometimes you think you've tucked a part of yourself away in a cupboard and nailed it shut. Then the door swings open with a soft creak, and there it is, the thing you loved and lost, sitting with. its feet dangling, humming like it never left. Garrett took a breath and handed Nora a key. She reached for it. And when their fingers brushed, the past stood up. He saw a saloon doorway with lamplight like honey. He saw a young woman in a blue dress, singing quietly in the corner. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she couldn't help it. He saw himself lean in, hat in hand, a man with too many nights behind him. Out to the back steps and told him in a voice tender as a bandage that there were other ways to live. He had wanted to kiss her then. He didn't. He had told her he would leave the gang. Not then. A robbery went bad and a boy died. And Garrett stopped lying. Slipped away from the men he'd rode with and came out here, changed his name, built something true, plank by plank. He wrote a letter to Nora Plain. Honest. Bleeding. But the words never reached her. He told himself she'd moved on. Told himself she'd married someone who prayed out loud and listened when others did. He told himself stories so well. He almost believed them. Now she was in front of him with 2 sisters and a violin case, and the kind of tired a person can't sleep out of their bones. "I'll show you up," he said. Penny trotted beside him up the narrow stairs. "Do you put sugar on the top of the buns to make them sparkle?" she asked, serious as a judge. "I do," he said. "A little." Nora walked behind him. He could feel her, an old habit his body hadn't forgotten. June walked last, still. Watching the hallways like walls could be trouble. "You any good at keeping secrets?" June asked. Garrett looked at her over his shoulder. "I used to be," he said. "Not anymore. Secrets make men and women bend the wrong ways. They make a person hard where they should be soft." June made a face like that sounded like preacher talk. Nora said nothing. They reached the end of the hall, and Garrett opened the door to a clean room with 3 narrow beds and a window that watched the street. Penny ran in and bounced once, just to feel the bed do its little sky trick under her. Nora set the violin case on the dresser with reverence. June went to the window and lifted a corner of the curtain with 2 fingers. "Too much light," she said. "Leave it," Nora replied. "We need to see who sees us." Garrett stood with the key in his hand. "A moment longer. I'll bring water and buns," he said. "We can square up in the morning." He moved a step back into the hall. Nora's hand touched his sleeve, light as moth wings. "Garrett," she said. He turned. "Is it you?" she asked, searching his face. "Under the new name?" He swallowed. "I am what's left of him," he said, plain. She nodded like a woman who keeps the promise she made to stand straight. "I am what's left of me," she said. "We'll see if the pieces can find a shape." She lowered her hand. "One night," she added, "you don't dare longer." A boot scuffed on the boardwalk below. A laugh rang up, too loud. The sound slammed Nora back into now. She stepped away, the door a line drawn with wood. Garrett nodded once and left. Downstairs, he packed 2 buns with butter and honey and poured water from the blue pitcher. His hands trembled, so he steadied them. He had work to do. He had a past coming up the street. Marshal Silas Hart wore law on his chest like a necklace he deserved. His badge gleamed when he leaned in a doorway and smiled, that smile that never touched his eyes. Sagebrush Flats was a place that liked to keep things easy. Hart made easy feel expensive. He came into the Lantern House an hour after sundown, the air moving aside for him like an old habit. He leaned his hip against the counter and tapped the bell once with a knuckle. He didn't look like a man who needed to ding anything to get what he wanted. Garrett wiped his hands on a rag and came out of the kitchen. "Marshal," he said. "Evening," Hart said, and his gaze slid over the room like oil on water. "Got word we had new folks in town. 3 ladies came on the south coach." His smile flicked. "I worry about women traveling alone, bears and such." "We don't get many bears," Garrett said. "No," Hart said. "We don't. I keep them away." "What do you need, Marshal?" Hart's smile straightened. "Just a look at your register." He tapped the book with a finger. His hands were nice. That was one of the things about him that made folks let him borrow their faith. He had a way of making you feel safe while he checked if you had anything he wanted. "House policy," Garrett said, light, non-smooth. "We don't show the register without a warrant." Hart chuckled. "Since when do we use papers to keep folks safe around here?" He leaned in. Don't make me walk up your stairs for something I can carry in my hand. Garrett met his eyes and did not blink. He could smell peppermint and powder on the man. Hart held Garrett's gaze for a beat, and then let it go, like a cat letting a mouse sit in the corner just long enough to say, "I'm kind." "I'll be back," Hart said. "A man gets what he needs." It's a good motto. "Depends on the man," Garrett replied. Hart's smile turned real for a second. Mean. He tipped that gleaming badge at the lamp and walked out. Boots slow, like he owned the boards. Garrett stood with his hand resting on the register. Feeling the imprint of Nora's name through the paper, he breathed in and then went up the stairs. He knocked soft. June opened the door like it might be a trick. "Nora," Garrett said, Hart sniffing, "he wants the register. He'll be back with somebody who can scrawl legal words." Mouth went thin. "Followed us faster than I hoped," she said. "He must have friends in Wren Township." "What did you take?" June asked, like a challenge. Nora almost smiled, something tight and proud. "No one here took anything," she said. She tapped the violin case. "We kept something that shouldn't be kept by men who hurt people." Garrett looked at the case. "Ledger?" he asked. She blinked. "How did you— I've seen that look on a person who knows they're holding dynamite," he said. "What is it?" Names, Nora said. "Simple. Amounts. The marshal's cut on everything that moves through this county. He keeps 2 sets of books for the railroad, another for the brothels he swears don't exist, a little one for bribes." Silas Hart writes small and quick. "I used to sing in the house near the river. Nora's called Miss Pearl. She taught me how paper doesn't lie even when men do. I was closing a lamp one night when I saw Hart drop the ledger under the desk. He didn't see me. Miss Pearl put a stocking on the desk to distract him. I took the ledger. I ran. Looked impressed." In spite of herself, Penny's eyes were big and bright. "We are on the right side?" she asked. "We are," Nora said. "And the right side is a small place sometimes." Garrett scrubbed a hand over his face. "You'll need to get that book to someone who doesn't go to Hart's poker nights." "State Marshal, Nora," said Captain Aldridge. "He's meeting me in Alder Bend. Day after tomorrow." Hart's boot steps sounded like they were already in the stairwell. Garrett felt the old part of himself reach for uglier tools. He told it to sit down. "You're safe here tonight," he said. "But in the morning, we have to move careful." June tilted her head. "What do you get out of this?" she asked. Blunt Garrett looked at Nora. He made sure June saw the answer there. "Plain as noon. I owe," he said. "I owe your sister what a good man owes the truth." He looked at Penny. "Also, I make very good buns, and I like to see people eat them without looking over their shoulder." Penny nodded solemnly, as if they'd signed something. "Sleep," he said. "I'll sit in the hall." Nora opened her mouth to protest. She didn't. "Thank you," she said. When he turned, she said his name, not loud, Garrett. He faced her. "If anything happens," she said, "if he makes noise enough to scare you, there's a letter in the bottom of my case. It might tell you the piece you didn't know." She lifted her chin. "If we have to run, I won't have time to hand it to you." June watched them like a wild thing, seeing weather change sleep. Garrett said again, softly, and settled on a chair in the hall. He had watched doors before, for worse reasons. A quiet night broke over the lantern house and held that kind of luck doesn't hold long. In the gray before dawn, a knock came like a flat hand on a drum. Hart wasn't alone. Men in brown coats stood behind him, eyes schooled. One held a paper. It had a seal. The seal meant nothing and everything. Hart's smile was knuckle-eyed as a knife in a napkin. "Warrant," he said, "to see who's sleeping in your rooms." Garrett looked at the paper and handed it back. "You read it to me," he said. Hart read it aloud, his voice plummy. Garrett listened to the way the man liked the sound of his own authority. Then he stepped aside. "Third room," he said. "On the right." Hart moved up the stairs like a parade. Garrett stood in the hallway beside the door and folded his arms. Nora opened before the marshal could knock. She wore a plain dress and had braided her hair tight. Her eyes were calm in a way that made a person feel the edge to them. June stood back, thin and ready. Penny clutched the violin case like a small soldier. "Morning, Marshal," Nora said. "We're just traveling. Your warrants say I committed a crime? Says I get to look at you and decide, Hart said. Cheerful. Where are you headed? Alder. Bend, Nora said. Hart's gaze ticked down and up. He smiled big. You sang for Miss Pearl, he said. I remember. Your voice could make a stone cry. You were her best earner. She was sad to see you go. Miss Pearl was sad to see me go because she wanted me safe, Nora said coolly. And because I did not let the men she fed touch me, no matter what they paid. Hart's eyes hardened. You always were a mouthful. Best to chew before you swallow, Nora said. Hart laughed, turned his head slow, like smelling. His gaze snagged on the violin case. Who plays? He asked. Penny lifted her chin. Me, she said. Open the case, Hart said. Nora stepped between him and Penny. Garrett felt the old part of himself twitch in his bones. He put his shoulder against the doorframe and let his face say, not here. Hart raised a brow. You sheltering women with unknown names now, Lane? Read the register to a marshal with a warrant, Garrett said. Names are known. Hart tilted his head as if confused by politeness. Then he looked straight through Garrett to the part of him he thought might tear. Osh called her, he said under his breath, too low for the girls to hear. Still playing. House. He smiled with all his teeth. Men like you always try the quiet life. Never sticks. Garrett didn't flinch. You have the wrong man, he said. Hart's smile said he liked being the only one in the room who knew exactly how much a secret weighs. Open the case, he repeated. Nora's mouth set. She knelt and flicked the latches. The case opened. There was a violin, small and well-loved. There was rosin, a handkerchief, a bow mended with thread. Hart stared hard enough to see if the wood would tell on her. It didn't. He straightened with a shrug. Careful, Miss Vale, he said, voice sweet as rot. This county likes its women agreeable. He tipped his hat and moved back a step. We'll be checking on you, he added. Often they left. Garrett stood still until the steps and the murmur faded, and then looked at the violin again. Bottom, Nora said. He watched her lift the instrument gently and press a thin wedge of wood on the case floor. It gave with a soft click. She pulled out a leather book no thicker than his thumb. It was tied with twine. Get dressed, Garrett said. We go now. To Alder Bend? June asked. No, he said. Hart knows that road better than he knows his wife's face. We'll have a stop on it. We send word to Aldridge another way, and we get you out by the East Ridge. He thought for a moment, picturing the land like a handful of cards. There's a sheep trail up near Devil's Thumb. Hart's men don't have sheep eyes. Nora nodded, quick that same stubborn grace. She stuffed the ledger back into its hidden gap and closed the case with a loving hand. Penny hugged it. We owe you money, Nora said, already reaching for her bag. You owe me one song when this is done, Garrett said. He looked at June. And you owe me a promise you'll keep some of that noise for the right time? June raised a brow. We don't snore, she said, but we do make noise. Good, he said. I may need it before noon. They slipped out the back just as the morning built itself up into real day. The lantern house let them go like it had let others before quiet, with only a soft opinion of its own. Garrett shouldered a knapsack with biscuits and a flask of coffee. Barefoot children chased a dog past the alley. A grocer rolled crates of apples out so the sun could tell him what was bruised. Nora kept Penny's hand in hers. June moved on the outer edge. Garrett walked at the front, taking them through alleys like bent lines. He paused at the corner of the general store, peered around. Hart's men were already at the livery. He had expected that. He doubled back and took them down behind the schoolhouse, over a low fence, through tall weeds that snagged its skirts, and left fingers green. They reached the cottonwood at the edge of town where the road split. One path led west, wide and easy. The other was barely a suggestion, heading up toward Broken Rock. From here, watch your feet, not your fear, Garrett said. I don't like heights, Penny confessed. Keep your eyes on my boots then, he said gently. Boots go where it's safe to put your feet. It would have been easy if the world were kind up the path over the ridge across the dry wash east into Big Sky. The world is not kind, but it does sometimes give you a little extra time if you ask with your whole heart. They had not gone a mile before a rider peered below them like a bad thought. He sat his horse easy, a man who didn't need to pretend. He lifted a hand in lazy greeting. Garrett knew him by how he held his hips. Brock Harlan. Brock had been a boy with Garrett once. They had stolen apples and horses and, once, a whole night from a town that thought it owned them. Then the war came and took boys and gave back men who didn't know how to hold a job that didn't shout. Brock had found the right side of the badge early, the side you pin to your chest when you want the world to say yes when you say no. Morning. Ash, Brock called, voice carrying. He looked up the path and smiled like a friend. Fancy seeing you awake this early? Garrett didn't waste breath arguing names. He heard Nora's breath catch behind him. He put himself a little in front without making a show of it. Marshall sent you to trail me? Garrett asked. Marshall likes to know where everybody is before lunch, Brock said. He squinted. You hauling family now? Garrett didn't answer. June bristled. Penny's hand dampened in Nora's grip. Look, Brock said, almost bored. I don't mind you playing guide. The man just wants his book back. Bring him the book, and he lets the girls keep their music. He tipped his hat to Nora. Even a man like Hart can have a soft spot for a pretty tune, Nora's voice. Stayed cool? The ledger doesn't belong to him. Brock's smile sharpened. You going to tell me it belongs to the people? He chuckled. You sound like a boy we knew once. He was always talking about the people like they was a person he loved. He got himself hung. Penny stepped closer to Garrett, small fingers clutching his sleeve.
Ow.
Garrett put his hand over hers. Can't let you up the ridge, Brock said. Still nice. Orders. Garrett looked past him, calculating. There was a cut in the rock to the left, too narrow for a horse, fine for 3 bodies, and a stubborn man.
No.
He could take them there if he got 20 seconds. Brock, he said, remember when you fell in Calico Creek near the old mill? Pulled you out, Brock squinted. He didn't like being asked to call up old debts. He adjusted in the saddle. You did, he said. Do it again, Garrett said. Pull yourself out of this. He nodded toward Hart's men, a dust cloud coming down the main road. If you stop us here, Hart wins, and he keeps winning. You know, that ledger doesn't just end Nora. It ends Miss Pearl. It ends half the women who ever trusted a man who likes his badge too much. He always liked women who could kiss and fight. Let that mean something. Brock stared at him a long beat, expression blank. Then he held up 2 fingers. You have 10, he said. It's not 20. 10. And if I count fast, that's your problem. He lifted his reins. 1. Garrett didn't look back. Now, he said. They moved quick. Penny slipped on loose stone. June grabbed her. Nora steadied them both. Garrett took the ledge with his hands and then dropped back to pull them up one by one. Brock kept counting, out loud, voice flat. 8. 9. 10. They were in the cut. Brock didn't turn his horse. Pretended not to see the way the rock hid them. Then he lifted his voice. Didn't see nothing, he drawled. Nobody worth chasing. Just a coyote with a fancy walk. The dust cloud rolled past. Hartsman glanced at Brock, who shrugged and examined his fingernails. The riders kept on toward the ridge path and took the wrong turn. Nora exhaled a laugh that wanted to be a sob when it grew up. Garrett reached and squeezed Brock's shoulder one brief, grateful touch across steep air. Brock jerked away like the gratitude burned. Go, he said, not looking up. Before I remember, I like money. They went. The cut took them to a saddle where the world fell away gentle to the east. The light made the land look like a dress. Laid out on a bed, all sigh and length. Garrett found his breath again. They pushed until noon. They found a stand of scrub that offered tired shade and a low rock that pretended to be a table. They ate biscuits and drank coffee from the flask. Penny pulled the violin out and Nora shoved it back with a smile. Later she said, Garrett. Let that laughter in the back of his throat escape. Play, he said. A song's bigger than a secret if you let it be. Penny tucked the violin under her chin and drew the bow soft. The first notes were thin, and the sound found itself and filled the space like water knows how to find low places. June pretended not to feel it. She hummed anyway. Nora closed her eyes. Garrett watched Nora's face. He saw the girl she had been, streaked with lamp smoke, singing under her breath while she threaded a needle for Miss Pearl. The woman who held girls like a hedge against men with heavy hands. He saw the woman she had become harder in the places. She had to be softer in the ones she refused to give away. He remembered the letter he had written that never found her. He felt a shape in his chest where words belonged. "Tell me," he said. She opened her eyes. "Tell you what? Why you left without letting me explain," he said. Back then she blinked. The wind tried to carry away something in her throat. She swallowed. "I got a letter," she said. "Said you were gone. Said you took what you could and left what you didn't want. Said not to wait." She looked down at her hands. It wasn't signed. "I asked around. Your gang said the same with their eyes." Garrett closed his eyes against the quick burn. "I wrote to you," he said. "Told you I was leaving them. Told you where to meet me. I went and I waited until the sky forgot it had a color. You didn't come." She lifted a shoulder. "I never saw your letter." They sat with that between them, the way people sit, with a grave they can't make smaller. Penny played on, not minding. June chewed a biscuit like it was Hart's boot. "Maybe Hart took it," Nora said after a minute. "He was deputy then. He liked to go through Miss Pearl's mail. Said it was to keep the house safe, I thought." Garrett exhaled. "I thought you chose a better life. I tried to bless you in my head, but a dumb part of me thought, you chose better than me. There wasn't much of me then worth choosing." She smiled, small and true. "There was," she said. "Even if you couldn't see it, they didn't have long for tenderness." The land changed as the day rolled down, and with it, the sound a horse makes on dry ground. June's head snapped. Up. Garrett heard it too. He was on his feet before he understood the shape of the danger. The horse came over the rise like a shot Hart. He didn't bring a smile this time. He brought two men, and the figure of Miss Pearl riding side saddle, lips tight, eyes throwing knives he hadn't asked for. Hart had his gun out, loose at his thigh. "I should have brought a dog," he said. "Then you'd be hiding up a tree," which would have been funny. "Pearl," Nora said softly, hurt in the shape of her friend's name. Miss Pearl didn't meet her eyes. "He had June," she said, "in the alley. Said he'd send her back bone by bone if I didn't show him the road you took." She kept her gaze at the horizon. "He's got too much fun in him for a man who swore off liquor." June bristled. "He never I'd know," Pearl said, and finally looked at Nora. "But he made me see it." Garrett eased a step in front of them. Hart lifted the gun, quick and clean, and the world shrank down to a barrel and breath. "Move aside, Lane," Hart said. "You can save your house by saving your own skin. I leave you standing. You can go on selling buns to weary saints." Garrett heard his heartbeat and felt something inside him stop pretending. He looked at Nora and at the sisters. He looked at Miss Pearl, whose eyes said, "I am sorry, and I am done being used." He looked back at Hart and did not move. "No, he," said Dot. Hart cocked his head. "No." Garrett kept his voice low, carried just the same. "I am not moving. I've spent enough of my life stepping left so a worse man could pass. I'm done." He felt Nora beside him, not touching, like a fire that didn't need bodies to feel warm. He felt the soft tug of a 10-year-old's breath. He felt June's, anger like a wild colt, wanting to kick and wanting to lie down both. "Silas," Nora said. The name was soft and cut him anyway. "You're better than this." "I am what I have to be," Hart said. "And you should have been mine. You made me look a fool. You did that yourself," Miss Pearl murmured. Hart shot her a glance that had murder humming in it. He swung the gun back on Garrett. "I have a letter," Garrett said. He didn't. Not in his hand. He had one in his mind, written in a room with paper and a pen that had stained his fingers for a week. "I wrote it to Nora the night I decided to be a decent man. I thought letters could bridge a canyon. Turns out men like you like to stand in canyons and shout so loud the letters turn around. I am telling you now what was in it. I love her enough to stand here. If you shoot me, you shoot a man telling the truth. And even you can't like that in your sleep." Hart's mouth twisted. He didn't like being named in public. He preferred whispers in smoked rooms. The gun didn't waver. "Silas," Miss, Pearl said again, quieter. Don't. Hart fired. The shot cracked the air open. Garrett felt the air move near his cheek and thought. A strange second of the bell in the lantern house. He didn't fall. The bullet had torn a curl of skin at his jaw. Hot, quick, bright pain, but not the deep kind that takes your legs out from under you. June screamed and didn't mean to. Penny made a sound like she had a violin string in her throat, and somebody plucked it hard. Nora lunged without thinking, lifting the violin like a shield. Hart laughed and cocked to fire again. Then Miss Pearl moved. Hey. She took off her hat and threw it up clean. Sudden. Hart's eyes flicked up, trained to watch for movement in that slice of a second. June, who had kept a rock in her pocket since she was 8 because girls keep what they need, threw it. It hit Hart's wrist. His hand jerked. The gun went off again high, skyward. Garrett took the step the world offered him, closed the space and slammed Hart into the saddle horn. The horse skittered. Wild. Hart snarled and hit back. Knee up, elbow out. Garrett tasted blood and old nights and did not let go. He wrenched the gun down and away. It hit the dirt with a thud and a small cloud. One of Hart's men drew. He was slower than a man who's had a gun pointed at him and decided to stay in his skin. June had another rock. How had she had another rock? And that one hit the man's temple. He blinked and sat down on the ground without meaning to. Penny shrieked like a whistle gone off and didn't stop shrieking, notes climbing. The other hired man reached for his gun and met Miss Pearl's riding crop instead, crack on the knuckles. Twice, with everything she had left from years of seeing the wrong kind of hand reach out, Hart twisted free. He rolled, grabbing for the gun. His fingers brushed it. Don't, Nora said. He froze, head up, eyes on hers. For a second, small, honest Garrett saw a boy in that face. The kind who wanted to be special, and got told he was, by people who liked to stand in the shade of a bad man. Then the second melted, and the man stood up again. There's no letter, Hart said, voice mean. There never was. I burned it. The world got very quiet in Garrett's head, like snow laid itself down. He stepped away from Hart like he needed air. Nora's hand found his arm, covered it, fingers tight. You took it, Nora said, something inside her breaking and making new room at once. You took the letter? I take what keeps me ahead, Hart said, proud as a boy with a stolen apple. He looked at Miss Pearl. And I will take that book now. Not today. A new voice said. They turned. A rider came over the hill at a calm pace, a black coat flapping in the gentle wind. He had a star on his chest, smaller than Hart's, duller too. Dada started Tay. He carried it like a responsibility, not a threat. Captain Aldridge, Nora whispered. Prayer with a name. Hart's eyes went hot and cold together. He grabbed for the gun again. But Aldridge had his rifle up and aimed with the kind of care that makes men think about their mothers. Don't, Aldridge said. I don't like putting holes in uniforms, even when the man inside forgot what a uniform is for. Hart stood very still. The hired men looked at one another, at Aldridge, at Miss Pearl with her crop, at June with her rocks, at Penny with her hands over her ears and her eyes fierce. A ledger, Aldridge said, and his voice was almost conversational. A little book that tells on you, Miss Vale. Nora reached into the base of the violin case and pulled out the leather book. For a second, she held it as if it were a living thing she had kept alive. Then she handed it to Garrett, and Garrett handed it to Aldridge. Thank you, Aldridge said. He flipped through it in quick flicks. He didn't need to read to know. He recognized numbers that stuck to souls. Looked up at Hart. Put your hands out, he said. Hart did. Aldridge tied them. The knot wasn't fancy. It held. Hart smirked and lifted his chin like this would be undone by lunchtime. You'll make a deal, Hart said. You'll want me to give you names you don't have. You'll want to step careful because of the railroad. He smiled. I know how the world turns. Aldridge tilted his head. Do you? Miss Pearl took a breath like the first one she'd had. That didn't taste like someone else's smoke. June looked like somebody had inverted her and shaken out some of the anger. Penny wiped her face and hiccuped. Garrett stood very still and let the pieces of his life rearrange themselves inside his chest. He put a hand to his jaw and pulled it away red. Nora reached and touched the blood with the gentlest finger, almost surprised he wasn't broken more. "You all right?" she asked. "I am now," he said, and didn't care who heard. He turned to Aldridge. "You ride fast," he said. "I got a telegram," Aldridge replied, eyes amused. "From a June Vale?" Said, "A man wears a badge like a thief wears a mask." Said, "Please, hurry." Nora's head whipped to June, who gave a small, defiant shrug. "Found the telegraph behind the widow Hayes's. Used my own money. Don't yell." "Not yelling," Nora said, and June blinked because the words sounded like you did good. Aldridge turned hard over to one of his men who had come along a back trail, quiet as thought. Miss Pearl watched the binding with a satisfaction she didn't try to hide. The hired men looked at the dirt in a new way as if it might have opinions they didn't want to hear. "You must like this town," Aldridge said to Garrett, a half smile. Most men would have let the law fight the law and kept their head down. Garrett thought about letters that go missing, and women who make stubborn look like Grace and girls, who throw rocks just right and buns with sugar on top. "I do," he said. "Turns out." VIE they went back to Sagebrush Flats in a slow cloud. The town met them not with pretty words but with body language. Men stepped off curbs, women took off aprons and came out to the street. The storekeeper put his hands on his hips like he was about to add to a ledger and finally liked the numbers. A drunk stirred and sobered. It felt like a small storm passed through a hot room. Lydia Crow stood on the Lantern House steps, both hands wrapped around the rail, face pale and beautiful in the way a statue is beautiful. She wore the dress she had chosen for her wedding, not because the day had come, but because she had hoped making the dress real would make the man inside it real too. Garrett felt the shape of this part coming and braced, and bracing didn't. "Make it hurt less, Garrett," she said, quiet, when he climbed the steps. "What have you done?" He stopped in front of her. He could see himself in her eyes, small and flawed and not the person she deserved. He had liked her from the first for her good brain and the way she looked at him like a man who could be. Counted on to count the flour and make sure nobody went hungry in the winter. He had let that look be a lie she believed. He had told himself it was kindness. "I told the truth," he said, steady. "I stood where I had to, and I stood where I wanted to." Her mouth trembled. She glanced past him at Nora, who had stopped a respectful distance away. Penny clutched Nora's hand and tried to stop looking like she'd been crying by making her face a hard little line. June leaned against the doorframe, both arms crossed, eyes daring the town to have an opinion. Lydia looked back at Garrett. "Do you love her?" she asked, and those 4 words felt heavier than a lawman's badge. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. Pain moved through her like weather through a wheat field visible, then gone because it had to go somewhere. "You should have said it sooner," she murmured. "I tried and failed," he said. "'Cause..." He had promised himself in the shade of a cottonwood once that he'd stop softening blame. "I owe you an apology. I can't make pretty." She let out a soft breath. "You owe me the truth tomorrow, the day after that. And you owe me a kiss on the cheek, and then you owe me to leave me alone." She lifted her chin. Strength had always been in her. He'd liked that. "I will not be the woman a man marries because he said he would once," she added. "I will be the woman a man marries because he can't stand not to." "I am sorry," he said again, and meant it in every direction. She nodded and stepped aside. "I will send your mother a basket," Nora said softly to Lydia as she passed. Not because baskets fix pride, but because bread and jam and a note like a cool cloth can make the day be bearable. Lydia looked at Nora, like she wanted to dislike her and couldn't. She nodded once, curt and grateful. They carried Hart to the jail in the middle of town, but not through the front. They took him around the back, because Aldridge didn't like giving a man a stage for his last strutting. Folks murmured. And the murmurs were tired and satisfied and afraid in small ways that make communities grow or shrink. Garrett did something he'd wanted to do since he built the Lantern House. He stood on the front step and turned, so the town could see him. He didn't climb up on a chair, didn't let the preacher voice come in and paint the moment a color it wasn't. He just lifted his head and spoke. "My name is Garrett Lane," he said. "It used to be Ash Calder. I did wrong. I rode with men who robbed more than money. I left. I wrote a letter I should have delivered with my own mouth. I hid in plain sight because I didn't trust myself not to fall back into the old gravity. I am done hiding. I will run this house and make bread and help who I can. If you want me run out, I'll go. If you want me here, I stay. Either way. I will keep being the man I told myself I could be at last. Silence is a thing with weight. It sat there a long time. Then old man Keegan, who had once followed Hart like shadow, spat in the dirt and said, "You make a good bun." People chuckled, awkward and relieved. The widow Hayes nodded, slow. The schoolteacher said, "I will keep the accounts until trust feels like bread again." Garrett nodded to her, grateful. Mr. Vega, who owned the forge, lifted his hammer. In salute, it fell simple and right. Miss Pearl slipped her hand into Nora's long enough to be felt. "I'll testify," she said, as if handing over a secret. "He doesn't get to take my spine and wear it as a belt." "Thank you," Nora said. "The town did not become holy in an hour. That isn't how it works. It did something else and bent." A little night came gentle after a day that had teeth. Nora stood in the doorway of the lantern house and watched the street soften. She felt carved out and filled at once. Penny slept upstairs in a tangle of arms and blanket. June had gone to sit on the back step and throw pebbles at the alley cat until it came closer and let her pretend. She didn't want to pet it. Garrett came to the doorway and stood a careful step away, like a man who has learned the difference between hovering and being. He'd cleaned the blood on his jaw and now had a neat bandage there, square as a window. He had a letter in his hand. "You gave me a letter," Nora said. "Once. It never found me." He nodded. "Hart confessed," he said. "That's as good as a carrier pigeon with a mean streak." "I wrote one too," she said. "When June was sick with a fever, years back. I thought letters would carry what I couldn't leave the house to say." He held out the paper he carried. "Found this," he said, "in the bottom of the storage trunk under the stairs." He swallowed. It had your name on it. The date 5 years ago. He opened it, hand shaking a little. It was his letter. The words hit him with the gentle force of a remembered wave. "Nora, if there is a piece of me worth keeping, it is. The piece that loves you? Meet me where the river bends and the frogs talk. If you don't come, I will take your silence as a command and try to obey. If you do, I will build something with you that doesn't hurt anyone to make." Ashi had stuck it in the trunk when he built the house, because a man keeps old parts of himself somewhere. He'd never thrown it away. Maybe some soft part of him had a plan for this exact minute. "I would have come," Nora said, voice raw as a field after a burn. "I would have run. I would have waited longer," he said. "Should have. I will. From here on, wait as long as I need to for the right thing." June was in the doorway now. She made a face like sentimental was a tooth she hadn't. "Grown yet? You two planning on talking all night? Some of us like sleep and our beds and a future where we don't have to listen to vows at breakfast." Nora laughed. It sounded like the violin learning a new song. "Go to bed," she said. June lingered. "Garrett?" she said, like the name was a problem she had decided to keep. "Thanks. You're welcome," he said. She nodded, embarrassed, and fled. Miss Pearl came out of the shadows, drawn by the sound of a woman learning to laugh again. "You owe me a song," she said to Nora, voice rough and full of years. "I do," Nora agreed. She lifted her chin. "Tomorrow night, in the Lantern House dining room. No hats, no hands where they shouldn't be. No deals done at the door. Miss." Pearl smiled with her eyes for the first time Garrett had ever seen. "I'll bring pies," she said, "and witnesses." They were quiet again. The sky did that trick where it holds on to the last orange until you think it's gone, and then gives it back for one last second. Nora looked up at it and then at Garrett. "What happens now?" she asked. "We don't hide," he said. "We don't run. We live so ordinary it's almost holy." Her mouth twitched. "I don't know how to live ordinary. I'll teach." "You," he said. "We'll teach each other." He held out his hand, palm up. She placed hers in it. It fit like the last puzzle piece, like a hat on the right hook, like a prayer on a simple morning. He squeezed, very gentle. "Marry me," he said. because there was no reason to save that for a more dramatic hour. He had nearly died twice, since breakfast. He was done gambling with the smallest and the biggest things. Under the sky, she said at once. Not in a house. I want the wind to hear us and tell the sage. He smiled. Tomorrow, he said. At sunset. Very soon, she said. Her eyes sparkled as if daring the world to try her. I have a loaf in the oven now, he said. Turns out I can do most things that need doing sooner than I thought. She laughed again, softer. Yes, she said. Tomorrow. He did not invite the whole town. The whole town came anyway. Word travels across boards and through soup and over fences and into hands that tug sleeves. Aldridge stayed not because of the wedding, he said, but because the paperwork thrived under the shade of a cottonwood. Miss Pearl wore her best gloves. Lydia stood back, a little mournful and a little lighter. The way a person looks who set down a thing that was heavy and was not hers to carry. Mr. Vega brought horseshoe nails. He bent into hearts and placed two. On the table, like a blessing from a blacksmith, June stood with Penny and looked like she was pretending not to cry. Penny didn't pretend. She cried big and proud and smiled through it. Garrett and Nora stood just beyond the cottonwood where the land took a breath before running out into everything. He said no fancy words. He promised not to leave in the night unless wolves came and woke him, and even then, to leave a note. He promised to tell her when he was afraid, and not to act like fear was something only women got. He promised to remember the names of the girls who had nothing and to plan a week's meals at a time so Penny's would know where to be. He promised to love her in the morning when breath smells like sleep, and at noon when anger smells like harm, and at night when memory smells like smoke. Nora promised to wake him softly and loudly as needed. She promised to sing when the rooms got too small. She promised to let herself be happy without making a deal with a ghost first. She promised to hold Penny and June until they grew away with joy instead of grief. Words for men who used papers to hurt and her gentlest for a husband who had already hurt himself enough, Miss Pearl cried. And when someone looked at her,